from Richard Austin, who is the National Landscape Director and is going to tell us about the adaptation proposals for Chichester Harbour. So welcome, Richard, to the stage.
Right, thank you, and good evening, everyone. So I'm Richard Austin. I'm the National Landscape Director at Chichester Harbour Conservancy. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about Chichester Harbour, so we can all get on the same page for what, the geography that I'll be covering. And then I'll move on to the state of nature, which is picking up one of the points on the pop-up banner there about conserving natural resources. And then move on to a little bit about what our plans are for adaptation in the future. I've been with Chichester Harbour for 11 years. I'm absolutely passionate about the place, as I'm sure many of you are in the audience as well. And it's a pleasure of mine to be here this evening. Right. So hopefully you're all familiar with where we are. It's just here, a small harbour on the west side of Sussex and the southeast side of Hampshire. And I don't think I've yet done a presentation where I haven't started with a map of the harbour. Having studied geography at university, it just goes with the territory. So this is the boundary of Chichester Harbour National Landscape. You may be familiar with it being known as Chichester Harbour Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. That changed to National Landscape at the end of last year, so we've got new branding. And I won't go into detail about why we've done the branding, other than that we were very keen to try and get that word national in the title rather than area, which reflects the national importance of these landscapes. It's 29 square miles. And within those 29 square miles, we've got 8,700 residents. It's the largest recreational boating harbour in Europe, the largest natural estuary in southeast England, and it's nationally and internationally important for its bird life. Speaking of which, these are the two birds of which it's internationally important for, the brink goose and the black-tailed godwit. It doesn't mean they're endangered at all, it just means that we've got a good share of the world's population for these birds. And in terms of national importance, we've got 10 birds at present, which are nationally important. I won't read through all of these. But what I will say is that where I work in the harbour office, most of these birds I can see from my window during the year, to the extent that I just take these for granted now. But when people come to Chichester Harbour, which don't have that privilege, they get really excited when they can see these birds, and it really adds to the experience. And due to the richness of the habitats, it's a heavily designated landscape as well. It's a site of special scientific interest, a special area of conservation, which is for the habitats, a special protection area, which is for the birds, a Ramsar site, which is for the wetlands, and we've got plenty of nature reserves as well. We're also part of the England Coast Path, so this is a national project, and that is the route which is being proposed for getting around Chichester Harbour. There's still work to do on the path itself, but we recognise that we are part of this national picture and need to be part of this jigsaw. And we've got solar heritage as well. So we operate this catamaran in Chichester Harbour. Hopefully you've all been out on solar heritage at some point already. If you enjoyed it, please go again. If you haven't been out yet, it is the best way to experience the harbour in terms of the sense of closeness to nature and peace and tranquility that you get from being in the centre section of the harbour. You know, whilst I enjoy walking the footpaths myself, it doesn't quite compare to being out on the water if you do get the chance. So everything's all good then? Is that No, unfortunately. We've got some real challenges ahead. This is a map which was produced by Natural England in 2021. where they assessed the condition of the site of special scientific interest and unfortunately downgraded the status to unfavourable declining, which means that year on year the state of the harbour has been getting worse and is continuing to get worse. So 80% of the harbour is in poor condition. And the reasons for that decline, well, there were several reasons for it. Climate change, poor water quality, in the news most weeks in some form, coastal squeeze, which I'll explain in a minute, loss of salt marsh arising from that, declining bird trends. So whilst we do have a rich array of bird life in the harbour, unfortunately, the long-term patterns are not favourable, and recreational disturbance, which is the people pressure that they have on the wildlife. So if I start off with one of our maps from climatecentral.org, it's a great website. If you haven't been on it already, then I recommend you go and visit it. So if we get to 2100, and think about Tony's talk earlier today, under the best case scenario, this is what Chichester, south of Chichester districts, Manhood Peninsula and Chichester Harbour will look like. And this means if there's a real disruptive jolt to our behaviour and we start acting in the best interests for the long-term protection of the environment. But what really worries me is if we don't have that sudden change. And this is what's left. So the Manhood Peninsula will be pretty much decimated, and most of Chichester Harbour will be underwater as well. And I was asked during the break if I do many of these talks. So I do go out around the parishes, I do talk to people, but what I don't see so much is changes in behaviour after the talk. And I think it's really difficult to know what you can do to change, and it's too much to simply ask the authorities to make all the changes on behalf of everybody. But we've got to change our behaviours if we want to protect Chichester Harbour by the end of this century. I mentioned deteriorating water quality, so by this I'm referring to the high levels of nitrates in the water which cause the mackerel weed in the harbour, the sewage discharges, the plastics, which were hugely topical back in 2018 but a little bit out of fashion these days, and the pharmaceuticals that are in the water, which perhaps you're not aware of, but all the medication that people take in some form or other, it ends up in Chichester Harbour. Whether it's a paracetamol or something else, the scientists have found traces of it within the wildlife in the harbour. This is because the wastewater treatment works, it doesn't filter out the pharmaceuticals. It's not geared up for that, so it just goes straight through your system and ends up in the harbour. If I could redraw the boundary of Chichester Harbour today, the black line is where I would put it, because I think we need a catchment-wide approach if we want to look after the water quality and the health of the harbour. The red line that is the boundary, for me, it's too narrow in focus. We need to be looking right up into the South Downs. We need to be looking at Pagham Harbour, Chichester Harbour and Langston Harbour together and managing it as a catchment partnership. And this is one of our ambitions going forward, is to have a much greater reach, because what we can't do is fix the problems at Chichester Harbour on our own doorstep, since the origins of those problems, some of them go much further. We've got a problem with planning at Chichester Harbour as well. I don't expect you to read the text, but in each of these speech bubbles here, there are major housing development that was approved since August last year. And if we just add up those developments, that's more than 753 dwellings that have been built on the boundary of Chichester Harbour. About to be built. Now, all of these dwellings were approved by the Planning Inspectorate. We do have a meeting set up with them next month, because my concern about all of these approvals is that when the inspector looked at them, he or she looked at them in isolation and not so much on the cumulative impact this was collectively having on the landscape. And that is something that I would like the Planning Inspectorate to take more account of in the future. The danger is that Chichester Harbour itself within the green line here will be preserved, and all around it will be houses in the future. We've got too many hard sea defences in Chichester Harbour as well, which is causing coastal squeeze. So on the diagram on the bottom left corner, it does a pretty basic job of explaining what coastal squeeze is. So habitats naturally want to transition inland over the period of decades, and when you put a hard structure in on the coastline, it stops that transition taking place. What we'd like to see is more of the salt marshes that are in the top left corner there. We like the wooded fringe around the harbour that we've got left as well. And even though the tree roots are exposed, most of these trees won't be going anywhere for quite a while, and they present a very nice backdrop to Chichester Harbour. And on the pictures on the right there, which is from Thorney Island, you've got a real-life example of coastal squeeze taking place, where you've got these hard rocks, and you've got fields behind them, and all they're doing is preventing the salt marsh from transitioning inland. Now, this is a graph that those of you that are familiar with the harbour will be aware of. So we've actually lost 59% of our salt marsh in Chichester Harbour since 1946. The rate has kind of stabilised in recent years, which is a good thing. But if we want to get the state of Chichester Harbour back up to favourable condition again, the report says we've got to return to where the salt marsh was in 1970, which is a massive ask for us. When you consider that we've got 300 hectares of salt marsh now, and we need to get up to 675 hectares of salt marsh. So just finding sites where this can take place is going to be a real challenge in the future. It was also mentioned in the previous talk about the carbon sink values of our habitats. What many people probably don't know is that salt marshes are one of the best. So not only are they good for nature, for wildlife, aesthetically, but they're also very good at storing carbon, second only to the mangrove forests, but also supported by seagrass beds, of which we do have in Chichester Harbour as well. Tropical rainforests were mentioned as well earlier today, but just look at the difference in carbon storage rates between these two habitats. And on to recreational disturbance. So with all the house building that's taking place, we're told that 1 in 4 houses have a dog. That means a lot more people walking their dog on the coast. And hopefully, if we do get to that point, it's going to be an educational message about making sure your dogs don't go running off chasing after the birds that have just migrated from Siberia, but are actually well behaved within the zone of the special protection areas on the Solent, which is shown on the bottom left map. Storm Kathleen was an event from 6th and 7th of April this year, which was pretty devastating on Chichester Harbour. I won't show you all the slides that I have of this impact, but I will show you a few. One of them familiar, the footpath that was compromised just north of Cobner, and a seawall that was down at Emsworth. Flooding here, this is at Northney Farm, and this is at Langstone, and there's a village at Northney as well on the Hampshire side of the harbour. So is this the future? Is this the way that we should be adapting to climate change with concrete seawalls? We don't think so. We think it's going to be extremely expensive to do that. It's going to result in the loss, the total loss of the foreshore habitats, and the cost of maintenance of these structures is enormous. And we're told by the authorities they just don't have the money for this work anymore. So this is the target of what we want to get to, and this is what we're calling nature-based solutions. So as we've heard this evening already, it's about getting nature working for us, because they can do a lot of the jobs that we want them to do as long as we're smart with our thinking and we're prepared to do things differently from how we've done them in the past. So my final slide from my talk today is about adaptation strategies that we can employ. So looking at nature-based solutions, not just at Chichester Harbour, but all around the coast and wherever we can do, is the best thing for the environment, but also, in almost all circumstances, the most cost-effective as well. We'd like to see new dwellings set back from the coast. So I'm not standing here today saying don't build any houses whatsoever, because I do appreciate there is a shortage of houses, but it just doesn't make any sense to me to build them so close to the sea when we know that sea level rise is coming. I think we need to help the marine businesses and sailing clubs prepare for climate change with greater resilience. These are part of the cultural heritage of Chichester Harbour, which helps to make it what it is. We need to roll the footpaths back where we've got space to as well. Really difficult conversations we've been having with local communities along this line. And I absolutely sympathise with the affection that people have for the footpaths and not wanting to lose that space. So what I would do at every opportunity is say to people that access is extremely important to me. It's extremely important to Chichester Harbour Conservancy. We don't want to lose the footpaths and not replace them, but what we do need to do is make sure that we can look after the environment and make sure the footpaths are in place so people can continue to enjoy nature for years to come. In terms of the roads, bridges and infrastructure, it's going to be a massive challenge for society with sea level rise. We should expect more instances of flooding. Bridges will need to be built higher, and infrastructure as well will need to be set further back from the water. I think long-term thinking with the decision-making is crucial. We've heard already that spending money now will save money later, but when there's an absence of money in the short term, it's very difficult to do that. But I think we do need to be really strategic, not just the people in this room, I mean as a society, because what the experts, coastal experts and accountants tell us that if we don't make these investments sooner rather than later, it's going to cost a lot more as we head through the 21st century. I wasn't going to cover much about mitigation in this talk, other than to say it matters. So things like your solar panels and your micro wind turbines, electric vehicles, it all helps. None of these technologies are perfect in the slightest, but they're all slowly starting to move us away from the fossil fuels that we're dependent on. And then finally, trees are better than concrete as well. I think we do have a deficit of trees. I'm a little bit concerned about releasing carbon with the planting of the trees. But I think before we get to that point, we probably do need an extensive tree planting programme to replace future sea defences at Chichester Harbour. And then perhaps we'll be in a place where we consider the environmental impacts of the trees, but hopefully nothing too negative. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. I think that's a really important takeaway because when we look at how we're going to get out of the pickle, to put it mildly, that we're in, hard adaptation solutions aren't just more costly, don't just squeeze habitats, but what do we all know about concrete? It's made from cement, which is extremely emissions intensive. So really what we're doing is trying to solve a problem by creating more emissions that cause the problem in the first place. So it just isn't a real option. Of course, we need some of them to protect life and property, but as Richard said, that is clearly not the way forward. And I think that's a really key part of adaptation. Is it isn't just about the systems we currently inhabit or how we go about tackling these. This part of adaptation comes from within us all as well, looking at how we're actually going to change our lives to deal with this. There's always that cartoon that people show asking who wants change, with a whole room full of people with their hands up, and then next to it the cartoon who wants to change, and no one's got their hand up. But this is an absolutely key part of adaptation. It is going to require lifestyle change.